The sun hadn't fully risen over Fort Bragg, North Carolina, when the transport truck rolled through the front gates, its tires crunching on the gravel road. A thin veil of mist clung to the training fields, where distant voices and rhythmic commands echoed faintly. The morning air smelled of damp soil and nettle, a scent of discipline and challenge. Inside the truck sat 6 young cadets, freshly assigned to the Army's Advanced Tactical Leadership course. Each one wore the same camouflage uniform and the same nervous grin that masked the thrill of being part of something bigger than themselves. Yet despite their identical outfits, their personalities couldn't have been more different. There was Tyler Briggs, loud and confident, a former college athlete who believed his natural strength made him indestructible. Evan Marks, the Joker, never serious for longer than 10 seconds. Jordan Pike, quiet but calculating, the type who watched others more than he spoke. The rest, Miller, Grant, and Lewis, followed the louder ones, their laughter echoing down the barracks hallway before anyone else had even spoken that morning. They were young, hungry, overconfident, and they were about to learn what humility truly meant. As they stepped off the truck and slung their duffel bags over their shoulders, the 6 cadets looked around the massive open field where the training would take place. The ground was rough, the air cold, and the atmosphere so strict it felt like even the trees were standing at attention. A few yards away stood a woman in plain fatigues, tall, fit, hair tied back into a neat bun, clipboard in hand. She was quietly speaking to another officer and occasionally glanced toward the incoming recruits. Evan nudged Briggs with an elbow. "Think that's the new admin officer?" he said, smirking. Briggs squinted. "Maybe. Doesn't look like an instructor. Bet she's the assistant or something." Miller laughed under his breath. "Yeah, probably here to handle paperwork or pass out water bottles." The group chuckled quietly, oblivious to the storm they were about to walk into. The woman's gaze flicked toward them once, expression unreadable. She didn't say a word. They had no idea that the same woman they were mocking would soon hold their fates in her hands. A sharp whistle pierced the morning air, and the cadets snapped to attention. The base commander, a gruff man with decades of service in his voice, stepped forward. His boots thudded heavily on the ground as he approached the new recruits. "Welcome to Advanced Tactical Training," he barked. "For the next 8 weeks, you will be broken down and rebuilt, physically, mentally, professionally. You think you're soldiers now? You're not. Not yet." He let the words hang for a moment before continuing, "Your performance, attitude, and discipline will determine whether you leave here as leaders or as failures. You will respect your superiors. You will follow orders. You will give everything you've got. Understood?" "Yes, sir," the group shouted, though the echo of enthusiasm didn't sound entirely confident. The commander nodded, then gestured toward the woman, standing silently behind him. "Meet your instructor," he said. "Captain Rachel Donovan." For a brief moment, no one moved. Then Briggs blinked. "Wait, what?" he whispered under his breath. Rachel stepped forward, saluting the commander crisply before turning to face the cadets. Her posture was sharp, her expression calm, but her eyes held the unmistakable authority of someone who had been tested by things far tougher than arrogance. "Good morning, recruits," she said evenly. "For the next 8 weeks, I am your commanding officer. You will speak when spoken to. You will move when I say move. And you will learn faster than you think possible. Because if you don't—" She paused, scanning their uncertain faces. "You won't last long out there." A nervous silence spread among the 6. The same woman they'd laughed at was now their instructor. None of them dared meet her eyes. Rachel could feel their unease, and beneath her calm exterior, she almost smiled. She'd seen this type before, recruits with swagger and no scars. They came in with loud voices and left with quiet strength. She'd make sure of that. "Drop your bags," she ordered. "Line up." The cadets obeyed instantly, the sound of their boots clicking against the gravel as they scrambled into formation. Rachel paced in front of them, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Before we begin," she said, "I want you to know something. I don't care about your backgrounds. I don't care how strong, smart, or fast you think you are. Out there, none of that matters. Out there, the only thing that keeps you alive is your discipline." Her voice carried the weight of experience, not loud, not threatening, but real. It was the kind of tone that silenced cocky laughter better than any scream could. She continued, "Since you're all so confident, we'll start simple. Warm-ups. You'll lead them." The cadets exchanged uneasy glances. Ma'am," Briggs started. "Usually the instructor leads." Rachel raised a hand. "You said you're ready for anything, right?" Briggs hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." "Then prove it." The group started their routine, each cadet trying to outdo the other. Within minutes, their movements grew sloppy. Push-ups faltered. Sit-ups slowed. Rachel walked among them, silent, observing every mistake. "Arms not straight," she said to Miller. "You just wasted a rep." "Pike, your back's bending. That'll cost you in a real field situation." Her precision unnerved them. She didn't shout, but her corrections hit like bullets. By the time she finally called a stop, they were drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Rachel stood perfectly composed, barely a bead of sweat on her forehead. "That was 10 minutes, she said. "You'll last 2 in combat at that pace." The sting in her tone wasn't cruel. It was honest. She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Briggs, who looked half ready to collapse. "You think strength makes you ready, cadet?" He nodded weakly. "No," she said. "Control does. You'll learn that before this course ends, one way or another." The sound of boots, orders, and wind filled the silence that followed. As Rachel dismissed them to rest, the cadets trudged toward the barracks, silent for once. The laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by heavy breathing and even heavier thoughts. Briggs muttered under his breath, "She's something else." Evan nodded, eyes still wide. "No kidding. I thought she'd be easy?" "Easy?" Pike said quietly. "She's the real deal." That night, the barracks were quiet. Even the usual jokes had died out. Each cadet lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman who had shattered their assumptions in less than an hour. None of them knew her story, where she'd served, what she'd seen, or why she commanded respect without ever raising her voice. But they all felt it, a quiet power that came from something deeper than rank. As the lights went out and the field lamps glowed faintly through the barracks windows, one thought crossed every cadet's mind. They'd underestimated her once. They wouldn't make that mistake again, because tomorrow, training would begin for real. And Captain Rachel Donovan wasn't here to make friends. She was here to make soldiers. The next morning broke with a whistle that could have woken the dead. Before dawn's first light, the barracks door slammed open, and Captain Rachel Donovan's voice thundered through the sleeping quarters. "On your feet, cadets?" Uniform sharp, boots laced, field in 5 minutes. The 6 men scrambled like startled cats. The room filled with a chaotic symphony of clanking lockers, grunts, and rushed footsteps. Tyler Briggs cursed under his breath, trying to shove his foot into his boot, while Evan Marks yanked his jacket on backward. By the time they reached the field, Rachel was already there, spotless, steady, and holding a clipboard like a sword. Her posture screamed control. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her silence alone made them uneasy. When the last cadet finally stumbled into formation, she glanced at her watch. 4 minutes, 52 seconds, she said coolly. "You made it, barely. That's the last time you'll ever barely make anything in my unit." The cadets straightened, gulping down the morning chill. Rachel began pacing slowly, her boots pressing sharp patterns into the wet dirt. "Yesterday was a warm-up. You mocked what you didn't understand. Today, you'll begin to understand." Evan whispered something under his breath. Rachel's head snapped toward him instantly. "Cadet Marks," she said evenly, "do you have something to share with the group?" Evan stiffened. "No, ma'am." "Then you just volunteered to demonstrate today's first exercise." A low chuckle rolled through the others, until Rachel added, "The endurance crawl. For everyone." The smiles vanished. "Down," she ordered. In seconds, 6 bodies hit the ground. They began crawling under a network of barbed wire stretched over muddy terrain. Rain from the night before had turned the soil into a heavy sludge. Their uniforms quickly turned brown. The smell of wet earth mixed with sweat and frustration. Rachel walked beside them, hands behind her back, voice calm and clinical. "Stay low. The ground doesn't care if you're tired. The wire doesn't care if you're scared. The only thing that matters is discipline." Briggs, struggling to keep pace, muttered, "This is insane." Rachel's sharp ears caught it. "What was that, Cadet Briggs?" "Nothing, ma'am." He barked, but she was already beside him. "Insane," she repeated, crouching to meet his eyes. "No, this is survival. Insanity is thinking arrogance will save you when bullets start flying." She stood and walked away, leaving him to process her words as he crawled forward, mud streaked across his face. By the time they reached the end of the crawl, the 6 men were gasping, their arms trembling. Rachel didn't look impressed. "Up," she said. "Form a line." They did, hobbling slightly, trying not to collapse. "Push-ups, 50. Now." Groans rippled through the group. She ignored them. When you think you can't, that's when you start learning. Each repetition was agony. Muscles burned. Sweat and mud dripped into the dirt. Rachel's voice remained steady, cold as steel. She counted for them, not as encouragement, but as a reminder that she was still watching. 30-7 ... 30-8 ... Briggs, lower. You're cheating yourself. Briggs gritted his teeth, lowering himself properly. By the 50th push-up, all 6 lay sprawled on the ground, breathing like runners after a marathon. Rachel stood over them, hands on her hips. "You think this is punishment?" she asked. "It's not. It's preparation. Someday, when you're out there, no one's going to save you because you're tired. You'll save yourself, or you won't. Simple as that." Her tone wasn't angry. It was real. Every word sounded like it had been earned in fire and loss. After a moment, she said quietly, "Up again. Jog perimeter. Twice." Their groans turned to desperate sighs. Still, not one dared disobey. Rachel watched them run, her expression unreadable. She remembered her own first training years ago, how the instructors had broken her arrogance, replacing it with something stronger, humility and control. It wasn't just about physical power. It was about endurance of will. She saw the same raw energy in these 6, untamed, wild, and dangerous if left unchecked. But she also saw potential, and that was why she pushed them. By the time they finished their perimeter run, the sun had finally climbed above the trees, casting golden light across the muddy field. The cadets collapsed again, chests heaving, faces streaked with dirt. Rachel crouched down, her voice low but firm. "Look at yourselves. You're beaten, dirty, and gasping. But you're still here. That's the difference between a soldier and a civilian. A soldier doesn't stop when it hurts. They stop when the mission's done." Her gaze swept across their faces. "And your mission isn't done." She stood again and blew her whistle. Drill formation. March. The next few hours blurred into a storm of commands. Forward march. Halt. Shoulder arms. Left face. About face. Every misstep earned a correction. Every hesitation drew her attention. By noon, the 6 men had moved from sloppy chaos to something almost resembling precision. Their movements began to align, their rhythm finding shape under her guidance. When she finally called for a break, they dropped to the ground, gulping water from their canteens. Evan leaned toward Briggs, whispering between breaths, "She's a machine." Briggs nodded weakly. "She's more than that. She's—" He stopped as Rachel's shadow fell over them. "Rest while you can," she said. "Tomorrow's harder." Her words weren't a threat. They were a promise. That evening, as the cadets cleaned their gear in silence, the earlier arrogance had faded completely. The barracks felt heavier now, like every word and laugh needed permission to exist. Jordan Pike finally broke the quiet. "You ever notice how she never yells?" Grant looked up. "Yeah, it's worse somehow. Like she doesn't need to." Briggs nodded slowly. "She doesn't waste energy proving she's in charge. She just is." That night, none of them slept easily. Their bodies ached, but their minds wouldn't rest. Every moment from that day replayed like a movie. Her calm voice, her precision, her command. They realized something important. Captain Donovan wasn't training them to follow orders. She was training them to understand why they existed in the first place, to be responsible for each other, to fight without ego, to endure without complaint. The next morning would come fast, and with it, more pain, more lessons, and more respect. As the lights flickered out, Briggs whispered quietly to himself, "She's not just an instructor. She's the kind of soldier I want to be." And in the darkness, somewhere down the hall, Rachel Donovan sat alone in her office, reviewing their files by a dim desk lamp. Her fingers brushed the scar on her forearm, a reminder of a mission years ago that hadn't gone as planned. She looked at their photos again and whispered, "Let's see if you have what it takes." The clock ticked softly. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of marching boots from another unit. Tomorrow, her lessons would cut deeper. Because Rachel knew one truth above all. Before she could build leaders, she had to break their illusions. And by the end of this training, none of those 6 cadets would ever see the world or themselves the same way again. The third day began before sunrise. The cold was biting, the sky dim and gray. Mist hovered above the ground like a ghost waiting for orders. The 6 cadets stood shoulder to shoulder on the field, exhausted but unwilling to show it. Their uniforms were stiff with dried mud from the previous day. Captain Rachel Donovan stood in front of them, silent, arms crossed behind her back. The air between them buzzed with tension. She spoke softly, but every word carried the force of command. "Today, you'll learn about limits," she said. "You think you've reached yours already. You haven't even started." No one dared to speak. "Follow me." Rachel turned sharply, leading them toward the obstacle course. It sprawled across several acres, a mess of wooden walls, rope climbs, trenches, and wire crawls slick with rainwater. Even from a distance, it looked merciless. "This course," she continued, "is designed to break arrogance. It doesn't care about your rank, your strength, or your excuses. It rewards precision and patience, 2 things none of you have yet." Briggs glanced at Evan and smirked faintly. "We'll see about that." Rachel caught the look. Without pausing, she said, "Cadet Briggs, since you seem confident, you'll lead the group." His smirk faded. "Yes, ma'am. Good, start." Briggs took off at a jog, his boots slapping against the wet ground. The others followed close behind. The first obstacle was a low crawl through the mud, under barbed wire stretched only inches from the ground. The rain from the night before had turned it into a swamp. "Stay low," Rachel called out. "You raise your head, you're dead." Briggs moved fast, too fast. Mud splashed, his elbow snagged on a wire. The metallic rattle echoed through the field. Rachel's voice was calm. "That's a kill, Briggs. You're down. Restart." He cursed under his breath, but crawled back. Every movement was heavier now, his muscles burning. The rest struggled behind him, faces streaked with dirt. When they reached the rope wall, Rachel stood waiting. "Climb," she said simply. The ropes were slick and cold, cutting into their palms. Lewis slipped halfway up, scraping his knuckles. Miller barely made it to the top. Briggs was the first over, proud for a moment, until Rachel added, "Again, all of you. Until you move as one." Groans rose from the group, but they obeyed. By the third climb, their hands were bleeding. Their breathing turned ragged. Evan's arms trembled uncontrollably as he reached the final plank, but he didn't quit. Rachel watched without sympathy, only calculation. She wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for transformation. "Drop," she ordered. "Next station, hurdles." They jumped, stumbled, fell, and got up again. The course was relentless. By the time they finished, every muscle screamed. Their once clean uniforms were soaked and torn. Rachel stood perfectly still as they collapsed onto the dirt, gasping for air. She let them breathe for 10 seconds before speaking. "You look miserable," she said evenly. "Good. That means you're starting to shed the parts of yourself that don't belong here." Evan looked up, half laughing, half choking. "What's left of us, ma'am?" Rachel crouched in front of him. "What's real?" Her eyes were sharp, but not cruel. She stood again, her voice cutting through the air. "On your feet." The 6 staggered upright, legs shaking. "We're going for a 2-mile run," Rachel said. "Now." "Ma'am," Briggs panted. Now, cadet," she repeated, her tone quiet but final. No one argued after that. They started running, mud splashing under their boots, breath puffing into the cold morning air. Rachel jogged beside them with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Halfway through the course, Briggs started to fall behind. His chest heaved, his steps slowing. Rachel glanced sideways at him. "Don't stop," she said. "You stop once, it gets easier to stop again." He pushed on, jaw clenched. Evan reached out to steady him when he stumbled. Rachel noticed and made a note. Teamwork. Finally. By the time they finished, every cadet was bent double, gasping. The horizon glowed faintly gold as the sun began to rise. Rachel let them rest in silence. The exhaustion was their teacher now. When she finally spoke, her tone softened, just a fraction. "You think I'm here to punish you," she said. "I'm not. I'm here to keep you alive when it matters. Out there, you don't get second chances. You either do the job, or someone dies. That's reality." Her voice carried something new, not just authority, but experience. They heard the edge of memory behind her words, the ghost of something she'd lived through. The cadets looked at her differently then, not as a woman to mock, not even as a commander to fear, but as someone who'd walked through fire and come back stronger. Briggs wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "how long have you been doing this?" Rachel paused. "Long enough to know you can't fake readiness." He nodded, saying nothing more. At afternoon, she gathered them in a small open field behind the barracks. "We'll finish with drills," she said. "I want formation marches, silent, synchronized, no missteps. You move together or not at all." The men formed a line. She shouted commands with precise rhythm. "Forward march, left face. Right face, halt." At first, They stumbled, feet clashing, movements offbeat. Rachel stopped them each time. Again. For an hour straight, she drilled them. Sweat poured. Muscles ached. But something changed. Slowly, they began moving as one, 6 individuals, sinking into a single, cohesive unit. Rachel's expression remained unreadable, but her eyes softened slightly. They were learning. As the sun dipped low, casting amber light across the field, she finally called, "Dismissed." The cadets didn't cheer or joke. They just nodded silently, too tired to speak. But inside, something had shifted. That night in the barracks, the air was heavy but calm. The laughter was gone, replaced by quiet respect. Evan rubbed his blistered hands. She didn't even flinch all day. She did everything we did, better. Miller nodded. She's built different. Briggs stared at the ceiling, his voice low. She's not trying to prove herself. She's proving us wrong about everything. Across the compound, Rachel sat alone in her quarters, reviewing the day's reports. Her reflection in the window looked tired, older than she felt. She picked up a worn dog tag resting beside her desk, the name barely visible anymore. For a moment, her composure cracked. She ran her thumb over the metal, whispering, "Still teaching me, aren't you, Grant?" Then she straightened, the emotion vanishing as quickly as it came. Tomorrow would be harder. It had to be. Outside, the wind rustled the flagpole, and the rhythmic clang of metal echoed faintly, the sound of soldiers being forged in fire. And though none of the cadets realized it yet, Rachel Donovan had just begun the most important transformation of their lives. By the 4th day, the cadets had stopped laughing. The once cocky glances, the quiet jokes, the smug swagger, all of it had been burned away by exhaustion, discipline, and something new, respect. They had begun to understand that Captain Rachel Donovan wasn't just their instructor, she was their test. The morning began quietly. Rain clouds had gathered overnight, casting a gray gloom across Fort Emerson. The smell of wet earth lingered in the air. The cadets stood at attention, boots perfectly lined, eyes fixed ahead. Rachel walked in front of them, her expression carved from steel. "You've improved," she said. "You move cleaner, think faster, and some of you even listen." A few of them risked faint smiles. "But improvement isn't enough," she continued. "Tonight, you'll face your first endurance drill under full storm conditions." They exchanged uneasy glances. "Storm drill, ma'am?" Evan asked. Rachel nodded. 12 miles. Forest terrain. No lights, no signals. You'll navigate by compass and instinct. Objective: retrieve a flag placed at Camp Echo Point and return before sunrise. Miller frowned. "That's through the ravine, ma'am?" "Correct," she said flatly. "And before you ask, yes, it's dangerous. That's why you'll go together. You rely on each other, or you don't come back on time." A low rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. Rachel handed Briggs the map. "You're the lead navigator. Don't get cocky. This isn't about speed, it's about precision. And I'll be watching. Understood, ma'am?" She gave one last order. "Gear up. Departure at 1900 hours. And gentlemen, bring your courage. You'll need it." Nightfall, by the time they assembled at the base trail, the rain had begun. It wasn't a drizzle. It was a relentless downpour that blurred vision and soaked every layer of clothing. The wind howled through the trees like a warning. Rachel stood beside the truck headlights, clipboard in hand. "Check your radios, one each. Frequencies locked. Keep chatter to a minimum. If you get separated, stay put. I'll find you." She looked them over, their faces slick with rain, eyes gleaming with both fear and determination. "Move out." The team plunged into the forest, flashlights dimmed. Mud squelched beneath their boots as thunder cracked above. Every gust of wind made the branches groan. Briggs led, compass in hand, muttering bearings under his breath. Evan followed close behind, map light flickering. Miller and Lewis flanked, while Torres and Jensen guarded the rear. It was chaos. The forest swallowed their voices. The rain drowned their footsteps. The terrain grew steeper, the ground slippery. "Slow down," Miller shouted over the storm. "We're veering north." Briggs snapped. "Compass says east." Rachel's voice crackled over the radio, calm and unshaken. "Cadet Briggs, confirm your heading." Briggs hesitated, glancing down. The compass needle trembled wildly under the rain. Bearing 180. "That's south, Cadet," Rachel's voice cut in. "You're walking the wrong way." Silence. Then, "Correcting, ma'am." Evan grinned despite the rain. "Guess even compasses don't like your attitude." "Shut up and move," Briggs growled, though there was no real venom in his tone this time. They pressed on, pushing through knee-deep mud and tangled roots. Hours passed. The rain never stopped. When they reached the ravine, they realized the worst. The bridge had collapsed. Only the remnants of a rope and a few planks remained. Torres whistled softly. "We're supposed to cross that?" Rachel's voice came again through the static. "There's an alternate crossing, 300 meters west. You'll need to improvise a line." "Copy that," Briggs said. Using their belts and a length of training rope, they rigged a makeshift tether across a fallen log. One by one, they crawled across. The log was slick, the current below roaring violently. Miller went first, slow, careful, muttering prayers under his breath. Then Lewis, then Evan. When Briggs started, lightning split the sky. The flash startled him. His hand slipped. The rope jerked loose. "Briggs!" Evan yelled, grabbing for him. Rachel's voice burst through the radio, sharp as a blade. "Hold that line." Briggs dangled, boots scraping against the bark. Evan lunged forward, catching his sleeve. For a few seconds, they both hung there, muscles straining against gravity and fear. With a growl, Briggs pulled himself back up, breathing hard. Evan steadied him, muttering, "Still think you're invincible?" Briggs managed a grin. "Shut up." When they finally made it across, all six collapsed on the other side, gasping, soaked to the bone. Rachel, watching from a distant ridge through night vision binoculars, smiled faintly. "Not bad," she whispered. The flag they reached Camp Echo Point near midnight. The small clearing was eerily quiet, except for the storm. A red flag fluttered from a broken antenna, their target. "Got it," Briggs said, rushing forward. He tore the flag free and tucked it into his vest. Mission complete. "Let's head back." Evan held up a hand. "Wait, listen." A faint metallic sound echoed through the forest. Footsteps? Chains? Rachel's voice crackled over the radio again. "You're not alone out there. The storm knocked out a supply truck earlier. There's debris in your path. Tread carefully." The cadets exchanged uneasy looks, but moved quickly. The trail was almost gone now, turned into a river of mud. At one point, Lewis stumbled into a ditch, twisting his ankle. He gritted his teeth, trying to stand, but winced in pain. "Leave me," he muttered. "No," Evan said firmly. "We move together." They hoisted him up, two on each side. The rain blurred everything. Their uniforms clung like armor, their boots heavy as bricks. Every step back was a battle against exhaustion and nature itself. By 3 a.m., they were still 2 miles from base. Rachel checked her watch, concern etching into her face. She could call them back, but that would mean failure. Instead, she said quietly into the radio, "Cadets, listen to me. You're almost there." You've made it farther than anyone expected. Keep moving. One step, one breath, one heartbeat. Her voice carried something warm, something human. The cadets pushed on. When the first faint light of dawn began to touch the horizon, they stumbled out of the forest, drenched, limping, but still together. Briggs, covered in mud from head to toe, raised the flag and planted it in front of Rachel. Mission complete, ma'am. Rachel looked at them for a long moment. Her 6 cadets, unrecognizable from the men who had mocked her days earlier. She nodded once. You didn't break, she said. You adapted. That's what soldiers do. Evan smirked weakly. You sure this wasn't supposed to be punishment? Rachel smiled, a rare, genuine smile. If it was, you'd still be in the ravine. They laughed, tired, cracked laughter that came from deep in the chest. Rachel stepped forward, her boots squelching in the mud. Go clean up. You earned breakfast, and maybe a little pride. As they limped away, she looked out at the clearing. The storm had finally passed. Sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the soaked earth in gold. Her reflection in the puddle looked different somehow, not softer, but lighter. For the first time in years, Rachel Donovan felt something stir inside her. Not command, not control, but hope. The morning after the storm drill, the world felt strangely calm. The sun rose over Fort Emerson, like it was apologizing for the night before. Golden light pouring over drenched fields, steam rising from the earth. The air smelled of wet pine and gun oil. Inside the mess hall, the 6 cadets sat hunched over trays of eggs and coffee, half asleep, half proud. For the first time, no one complained. No one cracked jokes. There was only the quiet rhythm of spoons and the occasional sigh of relief. Evan leaned back, wincing as his muscles protested. I can't believe we actually made it. Miller grinned. We didn't just make it. We nailed it. Captain didn't yell once. Yeah, Briggs said, stirring his coffee. That almost scared me more than the lightning. The table erupted in tired laughter. Rachel Donovan entered a moment later, her uniform crisp despite the chaos of the night before. Conversations hushed. She walked with that same precise confidence. Not arrogance, just purpose. She paused near their table. Cadets, she said. All 6 instantly stood. At ease, she added, eyes scanning each face. You exceeded expectations last night. Command has been informed. Lewis, still limping from his twisted ankle, couldn't hide his grin. Thank you, ma'am. Rachel nodded once. Don't thank me. Earn it again. Then, for the first time, she cracked a faint smile. You've earned rest until 1600 hours. Try not to break anything in the meantime. As she turned to leave, Briggs called out, Ma'am, why didn't you call it off when the bridge was out? Rachel stopped. The room seemed to hold its breath. Because, she said, you don't get to choose your weather in the field. And with that, she left. Afternoon shadows later that day, the cadets gathered outside for maintenance duty. Cleaning rifles, checking gear, patching uniforms. The mood was light. Evan found himself glancing toward the command building, where Rachel's office window faced the field. You ever wonder what her story is? He asked quietly. Torres shrugged. Probably born in a barracks. Miller chuckled. Or forged in one. Briggs frowned. Nah, there's something else there. You can see it in her eyes. She's seen things. Lewis nodded. I heard she was deployed twice overseas. Lost her squad once. Evan looked at him sharply. You heard that or imagined it? Lewis hesitated. Heard it from a guy in logistics. Said she came back early. Never talks about it. The group fell silent. Even the wind seemed to still. Whatever it was, Briggs said, It made her tougher than anyone I've seen. The sudden alarm at precisely 16:30 hours, the calm shattered. A shrill siren blared across the base, 3 sharp bursts, followed by a voice over the loudspeaker. Emergency drill. Incoming threat simulation. All units to defensive positions. The cadets sprang to their feet, adrenaline flooding their veins. Rachel appeared moments later, striding across the field in full tactical gear. Her voice sliced through the noise. "You 6 on me." No hesitation now. They followed her into the command tent. Maps lined the walls, radios crackled with static, officers shouted coordinates. Rachel turned to her team. "This is a simulated ambush on Perimeter Bravo. You'll coordinate defense with Alpha Company. Your goal? Hold the line until reinforcements arrive." "Understood." Briggs barked. Rachel's eyes were sharp, but something flickered in them. Something haunted. "Move," she ordered. Into the simulation, they sprinted across the training field, now transformed into a mock battlefield. Smoke grenades billowed, sirens wailed, loudspeaker gunfire echoed through hidden speakers. Rachel led from the front, agile, fearless, moving like she could sense danger before it appeared. "Positions," she yelled. The cadets scattered to their posts. Evan and Torres took cover behind sandbags, Miller manned the mock heavy gun, and Briggs relayed orders through his radio. For 20 minutes, chaos reigned, simulated mortar, shouting, commands. Rachel barked directions with uncanny precision, her movements sharp and instinctive. Then, suddenly, something in her changed. A nearby explosion from a thunder simulator triggered a burst of static. Rachel flinched, eyes snapping toward the smoke. For a second, her breathing hitched. "Ma'am?" Evan called out. She didn't respond. Her gaze was distant, fixed on something that wasn't there. Her hand trembled slightly. Another simulated blast followed, and she whispered, almost too low to hear, "Grant, get down." Evan froze. The others exchanged confused looks. "Ma'am?" Briggs tried again, stepping forward. "Captain Donovan." Rachel blinked, as if waking from a nightmare. She looked around, realizing the simulation was still running. "Status." She barked suddenly, forcing her voice steady. "All clear, ma'am," Briggs replied quickly. Her jaw tightened. "Maintain position." But the tremor in her hand remained. After the drill, when the simulation ended an hour later, everyone gathered at the debrief station. Rachel's voice was calm again, professional, but quieter than usual. "Good work," she said. "Your coordination improved. Reaction time excellent. Communication still sloppy." Briggs opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd seen the moment she froze, but he didn't mention it. Rachel dismissed them with a curt nod. "Hit the showers." Full report by 1800. The cadets saluted and left. But outside the tent, Evan slowed. "Did you guys see that?" Miller frowned. "See what?" She froze. When the explosions went off, Briggs nodded reluctantly. "Yeah." She said someone's name. "Grant." They exchanged glances. Lewis exhaled. Maybe that's who she lost. The file that night. Curiosity got the better of them. While working in the supply office, Torres noticed a folder on the open personnel log. Donovan. Rachel classified ops report. "Don't even think about it," Briggs warned. Torres grinned. "I'm not touching it, just looking." But he couldn't help reading the first line printed in bold. Operation Iron Dune, Team Leader, Captain Rachel Donovan. Casualties 5, surviving member Capt. Donovan. Below, a note in smaller text. Squad Leader LT, Grant Whitmore, PIA while shielding civilian personnel. Torres's grin faded. "Holy hell." Briggs closed the file quietly. Now we know. They didn't speak of it again that night. Confrontation. The next morning, Rachel called them for a briefing. Her voice was steady, but her eyes looked tired. Before she began, Briggs took a breath. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely?" Rachel looked at him sharply. "Granted." He hesitated. "About yesterday, the drill. You seemed distracted. We just want to make sure you're okay." Her silence was long enough to make them regret asking. Finally, she said quietly, "You saw something you weren't meant to." She turned away, staring out the window at the distant field. "Grant Whitmore was my second in command overseas. My friend. We led a convoy through a civilian zone when we were ambushed. He saved 12 lives and didn't come back." Her tongue didn't crack, but her eyes glistened. "He was supposed to teach the next class of recruits," she continued. "When he didn't, I took his place." Evan swallowed hard. "That's why you push us so hard." Rachel nodded. "Because I refuse to lose another squad to arrogance." The room was silent. Then Briggs said softly, "You won't, ma'am." Rachel turned back, her expression unreadable, but the faintest warmth flickered in her eyes. "Let's hope you're right," she said. "Because tomorrow, you'll face something even tougher." Outside, the wind howled across the empty training field. The storm had ended, but another was brewing, one that would test loyalty, courage, and the bond between instructor and cadets like never before. And this time, it wouldn't just be a drill. The morning after the explosion, Fort Emerson was wrapped in uneasy silence. Smoke still lingered on the horizon, a gray reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. The cadets had barely slept, and Captain Rachel Donovan hadn't slept at all. She stood by the infirmary window, watching the sunrise through streaks of ash on the glass. The base doctor had told her to rest, but she couldn't. Her shoulder throbbed from shrapnel. Her hands were still trembling from adrenaline, but her mind refused to stop replaying every moment. Briggs pinned under the beam, Torres dragging the radio out through fire, Lewis coughing in the smoke, her shouting, "Move, move, move," as the walls came down. And that flash, that brief instant when she'd seen Grant Whitmore again in her memory, shouting at her to run. Only this time, she hadn't run. The door opened quietly behind her. Evan stepped in, his arm in a sling. "Ma'am." Rachel turned. "Cadet, you should be resting." He gave a faint smile. "You should too." She didn't respond, just looked back toward the horizon. Evan hesitated, then said softly, "The others wanted to thank you for saving our lives." Rachel shook her head. "You saved yourselves. You listened when it mattered." He stepped closer. "Still, you could have ordered us out." "You didn't?" Rachel's voice was low. "Orders mean nothing if they cost lives. I learned that the hard way." Evan didn't ask. He already knew who she meant. The commendation briefing later that afternoon, the cadets were summoned to the command hall. The air was tense. Command officers lined the room, their medals gleaming, faces stern. Colonel Hayes stood at the front, reading from a file. Last night's fuel depot incident could have resulted in multiple casualties. Instead, thanks to the fast response of Captain Donovan and her trainees, we sustained only minimal injuries. He paused, looking up. Effective immediately, this unit is to receive a commendation for bravery under pressure. The cadets exchanged stunned looks. Rachel stood motionless beside them, her uniform spotless, expression unreadable. Colonel Hayes continued, "Captain Donovan, your leadership during the crisis reflects the highest traditions of the United States Armed Forces. However," the word hung like a blade, "your decision to override evacuation protocol will be subject to review." Briggs frowned. "Sir, if she hadn't, we'd be dead. Cadet, Hayes said sharply. You're out of line. Rachel raised a hand slightly. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. Her voice was steady, calm. If following the book means losing my people, then the book needs rewriting. A heavy silence fell. Hayes stared at her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. You may stand down, Captain. Your review will proceed through standard channels. She saluted sharply. Yes, sir. As they filed out, Briggs muttered, That's garbage. She saved the base. Evan nodded grimly. They don't like when heroes break rules. Rachel heard them, but said nothing. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead. She knew how military politics worked. She'd lived it before. Tensions rising that night, the base felt colder. Rain began to fall again, tapping against tin roofs like whispers. The cadets gathered in their barracks, restless and angry. She's getting punished for saving us, Torres said bitterly. What kind of sense is that? Lewis clenched his jaw. We can't let that happen. Miller frowned. What can we do? They'll throw us out for interference. Briggs slammed his fist lightly against the bunk post. We stand by her. She stood by us. Evan nodded slowly. Then we prove it. We write the report ourselves, every detail, every second. If command wants truth, we'll give them truth. They spent the next 2 hours typing furiously. 6 separate statements turned into one unified testimony. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. It was raw, factual, and undeniable. At the end, Briggs looked at the others. We put all our names on this. No backing out. They all signed. The tribunal 2 days later, the review board convened. Rachel entered the hearing room in full uniform. The 6 cadets were seated behind her, backs straight, expressions set in stone. Colonel Hayes led the panel. Captain Donovan, we've reviewed preliminary reports of the incident. Do you wish to make a statement before we proceed? Rachel stood tall. I made the call to stay because my cadets were still inside. If that's a crime, I accept responsibility. Hayes nodded. Very well. Before the board renders its decision, we've received an additional submission from your trainees. Whispers filled the room. Rachel turned slightly, eyes narrowing. Hayes continued. They've provided a collective testimony attesting to your actions, including evidence that your leadership directly prevented 3 structural collapses and 2 fatalities. He paused, looking up at the 6 cadets. Is this accurate? Briggs stood. Yes, sir. Every word. We owe her our lives. Hayes's expression softened, just a fraction. He set the folder down. Captain Donovan, he said finally, your decision was unorthodox, but justified. The board rules in your favor. Your record remains exemplary. Rachel exhaled quietly, relief flickering across her face. Hayes added, and effective immediately, you are cleared to resume command training. The cadets grinned. Evan couldn't help whispering, told you we'd fix it. Rachel turned just enough to glance back at them. I didn't need fixing, she said softly. Just witnesses. The ceremony a week later, the unit gathered in the courtyard for a commendation ceremony. The flag fluttered in the crisp wind. The air was filled with pride, laughter, and the faint notes of the national anthem playing from the speakers. Colonel Hayes stepped forward with a case of medals. For extraordinary courage and leadership under fire, Captain Rachel Donovan and Cadets Briggs, Evan, Miller, Lewis, Torres, and Jensen are hereby awarded the Silver Merit Star. Applause broke out. Rachel saluted, her jaw tight but her eyes bright. When Hayes pinned the medal to her chest, she looked down briefly at the engraved words, Valor Through Sacrifice. Afterward, as the ceremony ended, the cadets surrounded her. Evan grinned. So, ma'am, Does this mean we're officially your favorite class? Rachel raised an eyebrow. That depends. You planning on surviving the next test? Miller laughed. There's another one? There's always another one, she said. Then softer. But you're ready for it now. A quiet moment that night, Rachel returned to her quarters. The medal rested on her desk beside Grant Whitmore's old dog tag. She stared at the two pieces of metal for a long time. One earned from pain, the other from healing. She picked up the dog tag and whispered, You'd have liked them, Grant. Stubborn, loud, and just reckless enough to be good. She placed it beside the medal and exhaled. A knock sounded on her door. Come in, she said. Briggs poked his head in. Ma'am, sorry to bother you. The guys wanted to say, We're shipping out to advanced field ops next week. Didn't feel right leaving without saying goodbye. Rachel nodded slowly. You're ready. Briggs hesitated. We, left something for you. He handed her a folded cloth. When she opened it, she saw a patch, hand-stitched with the number 6 and a small lightning bolt through it. 6 for us, Briggs said. Lightning for that storm that started it all. Rachel's throat tightened. You didn't have to. Yeah, he said, smiling. We did. He saluted. Thank you, ma'am. For everything? She returned the salute, voice quiet but firm. Make me proud. As he left, she looked at the patch again, fingers brushing over the threads. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of loss lift just enough for light to enter. Outside, the base lights shimmered like stars, and the night wind carried the faint echo of marching boots, disciplined, fearless, and united. But destiny wasn't finished with Captain Rachel Donovan. Far away, a coded message was already being typed, one that would pull her back into a world she thought she'd left behind. A new mission, a new threat, and once again, 6 lives would depend on her. The morning after the explosion, Fort Emerson was wrapped in uneasy silence. Smoke still lingered on the horizon, a gray reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. The cadets had barely slept, and Captain Rachel Donovan hadn't slept at all. She stood by the infirmary window, watching the sunrise through streaks of ash on the glass. The base doctor had told her to rest, but she couldn't. Her shoulder throbbed from shrapnel. Her hands were still trembling from adrenaline, but her mind refused to stop replaying every moment. Briggs pinned under the beam. Torres dragging the radio out through fire. Lewis coughing in the smoke. Her shouting, Move, 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 as the walls came down. And that flash, that brief instant when she'd seen Grant Whitmore again in her memory, shouting at her to run. Only this time, she hadn't run. The door opened quietly behind her. Evan stepped in, his arm in a sling. Ma'am. Rachel turned. Cadet, you should be resting. He gave a faint smile. You should too. She didn't respond, just looked back toward the horizon. Evan hesitated, then said softly, The others wanted to thank you for saving our lives. Rachel shook her head. You saved yourselves. You listened when it mattered. He stepped closer. Still, you could have ordered us out. You didn't? Rachel's voice was low. Orders mean nothing if they cost lives. I learned that the hard way. Evan didn't ask. He already knew who she meant. The commendation briefing later that afternoon, the cadets were summoned to the command hall. The air was tense. Command officers lined the room, their medals gleaming, faces stern. Colonel Haas stood at the front, reading from a file. Last night's fuel depot incident could have resulted in multiple casualties. Instead, thanks to the fast response of Captain Donovan and her trainees, we sustained only minimal injuries. He paused, looking up. Effective immediately, this unit is to receive a commendation for bravery under pressure. The cadets exchanged stunned looks. Rachel stood motionless beside them, her uniform spotless, expression unreadable. Colonel Hayes continued, "Captain Donovan, your leadership during the crisis reflects the highest traditions of the United States Armed Forces. However," the word hung like a blade, "your decision to override evacuation protocol will be subject to review." Briggs frowned. "Sir, if she hadn't, we'd be dead." "Cadet," Hayes said sharply, "you're out of line." Rachel raised a hand slightly. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted." Her voice was steady, calm. "If following the book means losing my people, then the book needs rewriting." A heavy silence fell. Hayes stared at her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "You may stand down, Captain. Your review will proceed through standard channels." She saluted sharply. "Yes, sir." As they filed out, Briggs muttered, "That's garbage." She saved the base. Evan nodded grimly. "They don't like when heroes break rules." Rachel heard them, but said nothing. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead. She knew how military politics worked. She'd lived it before. Tensions rising that night, the base felt colder. Rain began to fall again, tapping against tin roofs like whispers. The cadets gathered in their barracks, restless and angry. "She's getting punished for saving us," Torres said bitterly. "What kind of sense is that?" Lewis clenched his jaw. "We can't let that happen." Miller frowned. "What can we do?" "They'll throw us out for interference." Briggs slammed his fist lightly against the bunk post. "We stand by her." "She stood by us." Evan nodded slowly. "Then we prove it. We write the report ourselves, every detail, every second. If command wants truth, we'll give them truth." They spent the next 2 hours typing furiously. 6 separate statements turned into one unified testimony. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. It was raw, factual, and undeniable. At the end, Briggs looked at the others. "We put all our names on this. No backing out." They all signed. The tribunal 2 days later, the review board convened. Rachel entered the hearing room in full uniform. The 6 cadets were seated behind her, backs straight, expressions set in stone. Colonel Hayes led the panel. "Captain Donovan, we've reviewed preliminary reports of the incident. Do you wish to make a statement before we proceed?" Rachel stood tall. "I made the call to stay because my cadets were still inside. If that's a crime, I accept responsibility." Hayes nodded. "Very well. Before the board renders its decision, we've received an additional submission from your trainees." Whispers filled the room. Rachel turned slightly, eyes narrowing. Hayes continued, "They've provided a collective testimony attesting to your actions, including evidence that your leadership directly prevented 3 structural collapses and 2 fatalities." He paused, looking up at the 6 cadets. "Is this accurate?" Briggs stood. "Yes, sir. Every word. We owe her our lives." Hayes's expression softened, just a fraction. He set the folder down. "Captain Donovan," he said finally, "your decision was unorthodox, but justified. The board rules in your favor. Your record remains exemplary." Rachel exhaled quietly, relief flickering across her face. Hayes added, "And effective immediately, you are cleared to resume command training." The cadets grinned. Evan couldn't help whispering, "Told you we'd fix it." Rachel turned just enough to glance back at them. "I didn't need fixing," she said softly. "Just witnesses." The ceremony a week later, the unit gathered in the courtyard for a commendation ceremony. The flag fluttered in the crisp wind. The air was filled with pride, laughter, and the faint notes of the national anthem playing from the speakers. Colonel Hayes stepped forward with a case of medals. For extraordinary courage and leadership under fire, Captain Rachel Donovan and Cadets Briggs, Evan, Miller, Luis Torres, and Jensen are hereby awarded the Silver Merit Star. Applause broke out. Rachel saluted, her jaw tight but her eyes bright. When Hayes pinned the medal to her chest, she looked down briefly at the engraved words, "Valor through Sacrifice." Afterward, as the ceremony ended, the cadets surrounded her. Evan grinned. "So, ma'am, does this mean we're officially your favorite class?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That depends. You planning on surviving the next test?" Miller laughed. "There's another one?" "There's always another one," she said. Then softer, "But you're ready for it now." A quiet moment that night, Rachel returned to her quarters. The medal rested on her desk beside Grant Whitmore's old dog tag. She stared at the two pieces of metal for a long time, one earned from pain, the other from healing. She picked up the dog tag and whispered, "You'd have liked them, Grant? Stubborn, loud, and just reckless enough to be good." She placed it beside the medal and exhaled. A knock sounded on her door. "Come in," she said. Briggs poked his head in. "Ma'am, sorry to bother you." The guys wanted to say, "We're shipping out to advanced field ops next week." Didn't feel right leaving without saying goodbye. Rachel nodded slowly. "You're ready." Briggs hesitated. We left something for you." He handed her a folded cloth. When she opened it, she saw a patch, hand-stitched with the number 6 and a small lightning bolt through it. "6 for us," Briggs said. "Lightning for that storm that started it all." Rachel's throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "Yeah," he said, smiling. "We did." He saluted. "Thank you, ma'am." "For everything." She returned the salute, voice quiet but firm. "Make me proud." As he left, she looked at the patch again, fingers brushing over the threads. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of loss lift just enough for light to enter. Outside, the base lights shimmered like stars, and the night wind carried the faint echo of marching boots, disciplined, fearless, and united. But destiny wasn't finished with Captain Rachel Donovan. Far away, a coded message was already being typed, one that would pull her back into a world she thought she'd left behind. A new mission, a new threat, and once again, 6 lives would depend on her. The morning sun poured over Fort Bragg like molten gold, stretching shadows across the parade ground where the graduation ceremony was about to begin. Rows of cadets stood in perfect formation, their uniforms immaculate, their boots gleaming. The smell of polish, dust, and adrenaline filled the air, a mixture every soldier knew too well. The air held a weight of pride and anticipation. This wasn't just another day. It was the day they would officially become soldiers of the United States Army. Captain Rachel Donovan watched from a distance, her expression calm but unreadable. Her posture was straight, her beret perfectly aligned, her eyes scanning the group she had trained for the past 12 weeks, the same 6 cadets who once mocked her on their very first day. She remembered their laughter, their arrogance, their disbelief that someone who looked too young or too delicate could possibly command them. Yet here they were, transformed. Briggs, once the loudest and most arrogant of them, now stood with his chin lifted, pride and discipline carved into his very stance. His uniform was pristine, his boots lined with sharp reflection. Morales, who once complained about every drill, stood beside him steady and focused, eyes sharp with confidence. Each of them had changed, molded not by words, but by the relentless lessons Rachel had given them. The commander stepped up to the podium, his voice booming across the field. Today we honor the next generation of soldiers, men and women who have proven their strength, discipline, and unity. His gaze swept across the cadets before landing on Rachel. And we especially recognize the instructor who took this group from chaos to excellence, Captain Rachel Donovan. Polite applause filled the field. Rachel stepped forward, her boots clicking on the concrete, her salute crisp and unwavering. For her, applause didn't matter. The transformation of her cadets was reward enough. But deep inside, she felt something more profound. These cadets had tested her patience, her resilience, even her beliefs. There were days she'd nearly given up, frustrated by their immaturity and defiance. Yet she never quit on them, just as no soldier should ever quit on their mission. As she turned toward the rows of cadets, her eyes caught Briggs. His expression was no longer arrogant. It was grateful, humble. He had changed the most, and she could see it. When the commander concluded his speech, the cadets were dismissed to approach their instructors for congratulations. A line formed in front of Rachel, but before she could speak, Briggs stepped out. His heart pounded against his chest as he marched toward her, breaking formation. The commander's brow arched, but he said nothing. He sensed something important was about to happen. Briggs stopped in front of Rachel and stood at attention. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. The others watched closely. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but shaking slightly, "before we leave this ground, there's something we need to say." Rachel's brows lifted slightly, her tone measured. "Go ahead, cadet." He took a deep breath. "The first day we saw you, we laughed. We thought you were someone who didn't belong here, that you were just another officer hiding behind rank. But you showed us what real leadership means. You taught us through action, not words. You made us stronger, made us better." His voice faltered, but he didn't stop. "You didn't yell to humiliate us. You didn't punish to prove a point. You just made sure we learned the right way. Every bruise, every drop of sweat, it was worth it. We mocked you before we knew you, ma'am. And for that, we're sorry." The field went silent. The wind carried the faint rustle of flags, and for a moment, even the commander stood motionless. Rachel's throat tightened. She had faced combat, loss, and chaos, but she had never expected this moment to hit her so deeply. Briggs raised his hand slowly, his salute sharp and sincere. Behind him, Morales followed. Then Davis, Thompson, Reed, and Collins, all 6 of them saluting her together. The gesture wasn't rehearsed. It came from the heart. Rachel stood still, her chest rising and falling with quiet emotion. Then she returned their salute, her voice low but steady. "At ease, soldiers." Her words carried warmth that rarely broke through her usual tone. She stepped closer to them, looking each of them in the eye. "You earned everything you have today. Remember, it wasn't just your muscles that got you here. It was your discipline, your heart, and your loyalty to one another. That's what makes you soldiers." The cadets stood proud, their eyes glistening slightly. Briggs smiled faintly. "You were tougher than any storm we faced, ma'am." Rachel's lips curved into a small, almost hidden smile. "Storms build stronger roots, Briggs. You all just proved that." The ceremony continued. Medals were pinned, and ranks were announced. Each cadet received their certificate, but when Rachel's name was called for recognition, something unexpected happened. The crowd, not just her cadets, gave a standing ovation. Officers, instructors, even new recruits clapped for the woman who had turned an unruly group into some of the sharpest soldiers on base. Rachel saluted once more, her composure unbroken, but her heart was full. She thought of the nights she doubted herself, the whispers from others that she was too soft, too young, or too emotional to train elite cadets. She thought of the battlefields of Afghanistan, the promises she made to the friends she lost, promises to lead with purpose, not ego. And she realized, at that moment, she had fulfilled it. As the crowd dispersed and cadets began to celebrate with family and friends, Briggs and the others approached Rachel one last time. "Ma'am," Morales said, We'll never forget what you taught us." Rachel looked at them. 6 faces once full of arrogance, now shining with confidence and respect. "You better not," she said with a small smirk. "Because next time, I might be the one calling you for backup." They laughed, genuine, warm laughter, the kind that comes from shared struggle and earned respect. As Rachel turned to leave, the wind carried the distant echo of the anthem still playing from the speakers. The flag fluttered high above them, and she stopped for a brief moment to look at it, the red, white, and blue shimmering against the sky. This wasn't just another class. This wasn't just another training cycle. It was a story of transformation, theirs and hers. They had learned discipline, teamwork, and humility. And Rachel had been reminded that leadership isn't about commanding obedience. It's about inspiring respect. She walked off the field with measured steps, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. Behind her, the 6 cadets watched, standing tall, not as rookies, not as children trying to prove something, but as soldiers ready for the world ahead. And though she didn't turn around, Rachel knew they were still saluting her in their hearts. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't shouted from the battlefield. They're earned in silence, in discipline, in respect. Captain Rachel Donovan had done what every true leader dreams of doing. She hadn't just trained soldiers. She'd built warriors.